Going to give a spoiler-free review of my viewing of Oppenheimer over the weekend. Oppenheimer being Christopher Nolan's latest blockbuster. I just want to start off by saying that Cillian Murphy was amazing portraying Robert Oppenheimer. Not only did he sound like him, but the way they made him look, he looked just like him. I want to also say that this isn't your typical Christopher Nolan movie. Christopher Nolan usually writes his own stories, right? Like Inception and Interstellar. That came from the imagination of Chris Nolan. But Oppenheimer is a different case. Oppenheimer was based off of a biography of him written by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin, and it's called American Prometheus. I also want to stress that Hans Zimmer was not involved in this soundtrack. Zimmer is typically used in Nolan films with the exception of Tenet, but Zimmer was busy because working on Dune 2. He's working on the Dune 2 soundtrack. So in his stead, Ludwig Göransson took the helms for Oppenheimer. And like I said, he'd also worked on Tenet. And he really, I think, brought this soundtrack home. This soundtrack really made you feel the anticipation about what was going to happen in the bombs being released on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So Göransson, I think, was a great choice. This was an all-star cast. Robert Downey Jr. was the villain in this flick, and he did very, very well. I should also state that Robert Downey Jr. said that this is the best project that he's ever worked on. Emily Blunt played Oppenheimer's wife. She was excellent. Matt Damon played, I believe he was a colonel or a general. I think it was a colonel. The cast was really, really good. If you're not a fan of history or World War II, I just don't think you'll find as much excitement in it as a person that's already seasoned in history or World War II. So I just feel like if you're already into history and World War II, you appreciate this even more. I won't get into any spoiler scenes. The movie has a lot of serious moments. There is a lot of, I would say for me, nihilism, like it's dark because it was a dark time, right? I mean, this was the first time something like this had ever happened. Thousands of Americans were dying in World War II. And at the time, the best solution that was expressed by the United States government was, oh, wait, maybe to make Japan surrender, because the story was Japan was never going to surrender. They were going to fight until the very end. And the story goes, especially that's mentioned in the movie, that the best way to stop this war and to prevent American bloodshed is to drop these experimental bombs that, Albert Einstein was recruited to work on the Manhattan Project. There was an arms race. The United States was leading the pack. And not only were the United States going up against Japan and Germany, but they also saw the potential threat from the Soviet Union that is also mentioned a lot in this movie. I'm not going to get into a lot of spoilers. I don't think it's a surprise that right after World War II, we entered a new war called, of course, the Cold War. And let me just say, the movie portrays a lot of McCarthyism. Even though McCarthyism didn't take place until the 50s, this movie takes place in the late 40s up into the early 50s, but McCarthyism didn't take place until the mid-50s, leading into the 60s. That anybody who remotely questioned the United States government was considered a communist or a communist sympathizer. And I will say that's used a lot, not only in this movie, but it was used a lot in real life. Oppenheimer, I really enjoyed myself. I think it lives up to a lot of the hype. Like I said, if you're into World War II, I think you'll enjoy this movie. But I don't think that a person who doesn't like history and prefers sci-fi and fantasy and movies like that, or a lot of action, I don't think, like I said, they'll appreciate Oppenheimer as much. Where would I rank Oppenheimer in terms of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies thus far? I don't know. That's a good question. I've heard people talk about this, and for me, I still hold The Dark Knight in a high regard, a very high regard. The Dark Knight, Interstellar, and Inception. But I definitely think that Oppenheimer deserves to be at least in the top 4 spots. And that could change. Right now, I'm still processing this movie. You're wanting to know if it's worth going to see, and I think it is. I think it's definitely worth going to see. It has the potential to be the best movie of the year, but there's also another movie coming out later this year that might also bring in some awards, and that is Napoleon. And of course, that will be starring Joaquin Phoenix, and it's a Ridley Scott movie. Ridley Scott also being the guy who brought us Gladiator, and of course, the original Alien starring Sigourney Weaver. I think Oppenheimer was a great movie. Cillian Murphy will be definitely competing for an Oscar role. I think you should go see it. If you like history and you like Chris Nolan, I think you should go see this movie. My favorite scene, and I'm not trying to give a spoiler, it involves Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein's involved in a couple of the scenes, and that's the best time, in my opinion, to watch this movie, is the scenes with Einstein. Another funny thing to mention was the scientist Heisenberg. He was one of the most credited scientists at that time. Of course, when I think of Heisenberg, I think of Breaking Bad, of course, right? Walter White's character. So every time the name Heisenberg came up, I thought of Walter White. But my favorite scenes involved Einstein and Oppenheimer together. Robert Downey Jr. was a fantastic villain. So those two stole the show. The guy that, Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., and the guy that portrayed Einstein. So go check out Oppenheimer if you haven't watched it yet. You owe it to yourself. If you're a lover of books and history and World War II, this movie will be right up your alley. Take your grandfather to go see it. Maybe he could appreciate it as well. Or your grandmother who was alive during that time. I'm glad I watched it. I'll definitely get it on 4K when it comes out. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give Oppenheimer an 8.5. I think 8.5 is a solid review for this movie. Like I said, there's these two movies by Nolan in particular that really set the bar high, and that's of course being The Dark Knight and Interstellar, but I thought Oppenheimer was a great addition to the Christopher Nolan library. Have you watched Oppenheimer? What did you think of the movie? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like what you watched today, just hit that subscribe button, and I plan on doing more reviews here soon in the future. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and like I said, let me know in the comments what you thought of Oppenheimer. Take care, everybody. Thanks.